So, as Fiona said, my name's Chris Doble. I'm a front-end engineer here at Canva. And for those of you who might not have heard of Canva before tonight, we make a graphic design tool, in case you didn't see the huge sign there. And our goal in making this graphic design tool is to help everybody in the world make beautiful graphics, regardless of what their skill level is. So it's a pretty big goal because there's several people in the world. And some of them speak different languages, some of them have different abilities and disabilities, and many of them have different skill levels when it comes to graphic design. Some of them are professional graphic designers already, and they use Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign on a day-to-day basis, and fingers crossed they wouldn't have a problem using Canva. But then at the other end of the spectrum, you have people who might not have used computers much before, but they still want to make business cards, they still want to make posters, and we want to help them do it. So from the very beginning, one of our founding principles is that we want the tool to be easy to use so we can support this very diverse range of people. Not only does it need to be easy to use, but it should be fun as well, because if you've never designed something before, you're going to get frustrated. You know, maybe you can't take what's in your head and put it onto the canvas, so you're not happy with your design, and that's going to be really frustrating. So our hope is that if we can put bits of fun into the product, it'll help people persevere through these periods of frustration, and they'll come out the other side with something that they're really happy with. So tonight I'm going to talk about 5 specific visual effects that we've implemented in the Canva web app to help us achieve these goals of simplicity and fun. For each effect, I'm going to give you a demo so you know what I'm actually talking about. And I'm going to explain the design rationale behind it. So what led us to implement this effect? What are we hoping to achieve with it? How is this helping us make it simple or make it fun? And then I'll talk about the implementation in CSS and sometimes JavaScript. Please forgive me. Some of the effects actually look quite complicated. You done? Some of the effects look pretty complicated when I show them to you first, but I'm going to try to break them down into component parts to show that they're not actually that hard to implement. So the first effect that I'm going to talk about... the first effects that I'm going to talk about can be found on our login and sign up pages. And I very specifically chose to start with this effect because it's likely to be the first effect that a user sees when they start using Canva. And this is what it looks like. Ooh. That was Cliff. He doesn't count. He's a COO. But as you can see, as you move the cursor around the screen, it sort of reveals parts of the background. It's like you're rubbing fog off of a foggy mirror, but you've got the shower running, so it keeps fogging up. Anyway, but as I said, this is very likely to be the first effect that a user sees. So we implemented it basically because we want to make a good first impression. We want to intrigue the user about the product. We want them to be thinking, wow, this is a really interesting effect. I wonder if I go through, if I put a little bit of effort in and I sign up for an account, maybe there'll be more effects for me to play with. So that's a very long-winded way of saying we want to increase the conversion rate of this page. But how is the effect implemented? There's actually 2 images used in this effect. The top part of this slide is the original unmodified image, and the bottom part is a sort of darkened and blurred version of the same image. The bottom half of the slide is just used as the page background. There's absolutely nothing interesting going on there. It's just a CSS background, so I'm going to stop talking about that now. And then the top part of the slide, that's where it gets interesting. As the user moves their cursor around the page, we take that movement and we mask this original image. We render it to an HTML5 canvas and we overlay it over the page background. So I can demonstrate to you the difference between the page background and this HTML5 canvas by showing the effect again without the page background, which looks like this. So you can see now, it's very obvious that as you move your cursor around the screen, it's just sort of revealing parts of that original image. So this is actually the interesting part. I'm going to tell you how this is implemented. We're obviously using the mouse movement, so this is a slightly less impressive version of the effect, where we've attached a mouse move handler to the document. We take all the X and Y coordinates, I'm just drawing a circle, and it's ugly as hell, but I wanted to demonstrate to you that this is the data that we have to work with. Everything on this slide is all you need to achieve the final effect. It's pretty straightforward. but this is a series of points. It's not a continuous line like I showed you, so let's break this effect down. The first step is to join these points into a line, like so. We're just using the Canvas API. We're generating a path from all of those X and Y coordinates and then stroking them. It's like 3 lines of code. But said it was like a mirror, and you're rubbing the mirror. This is like spray painting a wall. It's not going away. So how do we make that fade? We add a fade effect. And the way that this is implemented is every time we record one of those X and Y coordinates, we also record the time at which we saw the user's cursor at that position. And then over the next second, we fade the line out, which is why it's kind of like a game of snake, follows your cursor. And the last component of this effect is to change the width of the line based on how fast the cursor is moving, which looks like this. So you can see as I slow my cursor down, the line gets thicker, and as I move it faster, it gets thinner. And that's actually all there is to rendering the hardest part of this effect. But it's still just an ugly black line. Where does the original image come into it? Which is this image. Bit of a sidetrack. When you're rendering to an HTML5 canvas, there's a bunch of different compositing effects that you can use, like darken, blur, dodge, multiply, a whole bunch of other ones that I have no idea how they work. But the one that we're interested in is, should I use the hand, Mike? Is this better? Okay. I'm going to start again now. No, not really. So the compositing effect that we're interested in is called destination in. And what destination in says is, I'm going to render it as a canvas, and anything underneath what I render, I want you to preserve those pixels. Anything outside what I render, I want you to make those transparent. So it's effectively a mask. So for an example, if we were to render a circle to the middle of this image, destination in says, we will preserve anything underneath this image, and anything else will be made, anything outside will be made transparent, which ends up looking like this. And this looks very familiar to a certain effect that I showed you before. So if we pair the destination in compositing effect with the ugly black line that wasn't particularly interesting, we get the final effect. And that's how we implement cursor trails on the home page. So that was the first effect. So our hypothetical user has signed up for an account. They're amazed by the fantabulous cursor trails thing, and now they're ready to create their first design. So that's when they're going to see the second effect. When you create a design in Canva, normally you have to pick the type of design that you want to create. So here you can see we've got social media posts, presentations, and some other stuff. I'm going to show you the effect now. And I want you to pay particular attention to this More button on the right-hand side. So it's to show more design types. You click the button, it morphs into a close button. We show sort of an expanded list. You click the close button and it turns back into a More button. So why did we implement this effect? One, because it's cool. The two real reasons are because we actually don't have the information needed to render this expanded design list on page load. We have to fetch this via Ajax, which takes a little bit of time depending on the user's internet connection. And by giving them something interesting to look at for a second or two, we buy ourselves some time to fetch that data and still have the app feel responsive. The second reason is because as it's animating up to the top right, we draw the user's attention to the close button. We're saying, hey, this is the thing that you need to click on to get out of this full screen mode. And they're not going to be like, oh, how do I get out? I guess I'll just refresh the page, which is a terrible experience. So this effect, in the same, all of the effects that I'm going to talk about tonight are quite simple when you break them down. So let's break this down. The first thing that we need to do is transition the border style from dashed to solid, like this. Now the border style property actually isn't animatable, like you can't transition between these values in CSS, so how are we implementing this? The button itself has a dashed border, and we have an after pseudo element that has all the same properties as the button. It has the same width, the same height, the same border radius, the same border width. The only difference is that it has a solid border. So when you hover over the button, we transition it in, so opacity from 0 to 1, and it appears as though we're changing the border style. It's pretty straightforward. The next component of this effect is to change the border radius. So here we're transitioning from about 5 pixel border radius to a 50% border radius, which turns the square button into a circle. Next layer to this effect is to shrink the button down. We just change the width and the height properties. So instead of it being a large square, it's now a small circle. We rotate it 135 degrees because it turns the plus into a cross, and obviously every good closed button has a cross inside of it, so we kind of have to do this. And finally, we move the button up to the top right of the screen using the right and the top properties. Forgive me, there's actually a bit of JavaScript on this slide, because you'll see that as you scroll down the page, we want the button to be position fixed. We want it to always be present, so we need to measure the offset and then do an Indiana Jones kind of swap, and anyway. So this is the fire effect again. So you can see it's position fixed up the top right. It's always present, so they can get out whatever they need to. That was the second effect. So our hypothetical user that exists solely for the purposes of this demonstration has signed up, they've decided what design they want to create, and now they're waiting for the design to be created. We have to poke a couple of databases in certain ways for the design to exist, so they have to wait like a second or two for that to happen. So this is a progress indicator that we show while that's happening. So there's sort of this intermediate page where they see this thing, and they're like, oh, I guess I have to wait. We added it for the same reason that anyone adds a progress indicator anywhere, to indicate progress. And previously, before we added this, it was just a blank page. So the user would click on the design type that they want to create, and then their browser would turn blank. And they're like, oh, did I break Canva? Or did I open a new tab? Or I don't really understand what's going on. So we added this, and now they know that, oh, I need to wait here for a second before I can edit my design. This effect is pretty straightforward. There's a container div, which is the larger circle, and then there's 24 child spans, which are the little bubbles that you see at the start. So I'll talk about those two different things separately. This is a very complicated animation. We're scaling from 0 to 1. This is how the bubbles appear. But I said there was 24. There's only one here. That's because they're all sitting on top of each other. So we'll give them some left and top properties to spread them out a little bit, which looks like that. But it's very uniform. They all come in at the same time. So we use the animation delay property to sort of stagger when they appear. And it doesn't really look like a circle. It's not filling the space in between. So we'll set the width and the height properties so it fills up more space. And now that's looking a bit more like a circle. And that's actually all there is to the child spans. There's an animation on the container as well, which looks like this. It fades in after all of the child spans are visible, expands and then fades out. And when you combine them together, you get the final effect. And you need to add overflow hidden, obviously, and WebKit image mask, because Safari is a poor excuse for a browser. So, the user's in the editor now, their design is created. They want to upload some images to use in their design. This is the sidebar in the Canva editor. You can drag images from your desktop into this uploads panel, and you can categorize them into different folders and use them in your designs. And this is where the next effect lives. I'm going to show you the animation, and just pay attention to this tab on the left-hand side. So we drag some images from our desktop, and that tab turns into a progress indicator. There's like water sloshing around. It's like a porthole. And the water level indicates the overall progress of your uploads. So we added this effect because you can actually upload a really large number of images at one time. You can upload up to 50. So we kind of want to give you an overall sense of how they're going. We want to let you go to different tabs, continue working on your design while they're uploading. And that's why we added that. How it's implemented, it's even simpler than the ones I was talking about before. There's an SVG, which represents the waterline, continually transitions from left to right, and we use JavaScript to translate it up to represent the upload progress. And then overflow hidden, again, like the last one. We actually didn't use WebKit image mask on this effect because Pat hates Safari so much that he just refused to put it in. I should probably add that. If you're really lucky, while you're uploading some images, you might see a little Easter egg in the porthole. So there's a little duck that floats past there's like a 1 in 40 chance that it'll float past. If the random number generator smiles upon you today, we add a class to it, and this duck appears. It's also implemented as an after-pseudo element. We just add an animation and it moves across the screen. The duck came about because I kind of left an offhand comment on a pull request, and I was like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if we added a duck? And then Pat didn't take it as a joke, he actually went and added it. The final effect that I want to talk about tonight is another Easter egg in the uploads panel. I added this one. It's slightly more hidden than the duck, but I'm hoping that more people will find it as we get closer and closer to Christmas. So we've got a regular folder, it's got an image in there, but if you rename it to Christmas, you get Christmas lights across the top of the folder, and they flash. The width of this sidebar can actually change depending on your screen resolution. And basically, one of the goals for this effect was that I wanted the Christmas lights to always be strong from corner to corner, like real Christmas lights, like you hang them from corner to corner, and I wanted them to flash. So how did I achieve those goals? So many of you probably know about border images. It just allows you to take an image and use it as a border on a CSS element. Border image repeat round is an interesting value because it ensures that there's always a multiple of that, an even multiple of that image used for the border. It'll stretch it or shrink it such that it's always a multiple. It looks kind of like this. So you can see there's always 1, 2, or 3 copies of the image, and it sort of stretches and shrinks in between. You can also slice the border image in different ways. So here you can see the colours of the lights up the top are different from the colours down the bottom because I have 2 rows of lights in the border image and I'm slicing it that way. When I learnt this, I was like, oh, you can transition the width of borders, so I wonder what happens if I'm using border image repeat and I transition the widths. You get this really weird effect. It's not particularly useful, but I thought it was cool. So this is using timing function ease, so it shows all of the intermediate values between border width 0 and whatever border width I'm using here. But we have other timing functions that we can use as well, like step start and step end, where it jumps from keyframe to keyframe. So we can effectively have a 2-frame sprite sheet that's guaranteed to be tiled horizontally by swapping the widths of the top and bottom borders. So now we've got the animated lights that are guaranteed to be strung from corner to corner, and that's how I added the Christmas effect. That's how I saved Christmas. So those are the 5 effects that I wanted to talk about tonight. All of them were added to the editor or the Canva app because we wanted to make it more fun. That's why we added the Easter eggs, and we wanted to make it simpler. We wanted people to understand it. And some of them just because I felt like it. But I hope that by me taking effects that actually look quite complicated when you start and breaking them down into their component parts, I've shown that they're not that complicated. This is a tactic that we use at Canva. I don't know if any of you know Cameron Adams, but he gives us ridiculous animations and we have to break them down so we actually understand them. So, yeah, thanks. We're hiring. So